Charles I, born Charles James Stuart on November 19, 1600, in the opulent yet perpetually draughty halls of Dunfermline Palace in Fife, Scotland, a sprawling Renaissance edifice of grey sandstone turrets and vaulted ceilings where the North Sea's relentless gales whistled through arrow-slit windows like mournful bagpipes, entered a world poised on the precipice of dynastic fusion and religious fracture. The crowns of Scotland and England perched uneasily upon the head of his father, James VI of Scotland, who had ascended as James I of England just 3 years prior upon the death of the childless Elizabeth I, a union that promised continental stability through the Treaty of London in 1604 but simmered with the resentments of religious schisms, border feuds between reivers and wardens, and the lingering spectre of the Tudor Reformation's iconoclastic hammers that had shattered monastic stained glass across the Isles. The eighth child and third son of James and his Danish queen, and of Denmark, a vivacious Lutheran convert whose masks of enchanted forests and tilting tournaments would infuse the Jacobean court's gaiety with Nordic flair, her progresses to Scotland in 1590 having charmed the kirk elders with gifts of silver-gilt chalices, young Charles was a frail infant from the outset, his survival in doubt amid the palace's tapestried chambers where Flemish weavings of biblical hunts hung heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and wood smoke from peat fires, his wet nurses murmuring prayers to the Virgin in hushed Scots Gaelic while royal physicians, clad in fur-trimmed gowns, bled him with silver lancets to ward off the king's evil scrofula that plagued the Stuart bloodline, a divine touch that James himself would later claim in healing rites at the banqueting house. James, ever the pedantic scholar-king whose demonology treatise of 1597 had fanned witch hunts across the lowlands, executing over 4,000 souls in North Barracks flames, doted on the boy with a mix of boisterous affection and intellectual fervor, christening him Charles Robert in a ceremony at the Chapel Royal where the organs accompanied Latin anthems, and dispatching him south in June 1603 at the tender age of 3 months to join the court at Whitehall, a laborious journey by horse. Litter through rain-lashed roads from Berwick-upon-Tweed, the royal party pausing at Holyrood House where bagpipes wailed laments for the absent king and the child was swaddled in ermine amid the abbey's crumbling vaults. In London, Charles's early years unfolded in the shadow of his elder brother Henry Frederick, Prince of Wales, a robust, martial youth of 15 at his death whose equestrian prowess in the tiltyards of St. James's Park and Protestant zeal in commissioning the obelisk at Ben Jonson's masques made him the darling of the realm. Henry 1610 portrait by Robert Peake capturing a falconer in pearl-embroidered doublet, while the prince's apartments in St. James's Palace echoed with lute music from John Dowland strings and the Tudors' droning of Latin declensions from Ovid's Metamorphoses. Charles's weak legs, afflicted by rickets that bowed his knees and left him with a lifelong limp, necessitating iron braces forged in the Tower's armory, confining him to sedentary pursuits under the watchful eye of his Scottish governess, Elizabeth Lady Carey, whose Calvinist hymns of Geneva psalters mingled with French Huguenot airs in the nursery's air, the boy's first steps a wobbly triumph across Turkey carpets imported from Ottoman looms. Adolescence brought Charles to the courts of Europe in spirit if not in body, his education a rigorous curriculum of theology and diplomacy under the tutelage of Thomas Murray, Dean of Windsor and later Principal of New College, Oxford, whose lessons in the Book of Common Prayer, recited by rote in the Privy Chamber, and Jean Bodin's 6 books of the Commonwealth instilled a high Anglican piety laced with divine right absolutism, the young prince's cool scratching essays on the king's sovereignty as God's earthly vicar amid the Whitehall gardens where peacocks strutted under yew hedges clipped into heraldic lions and unicorns, his evenings spent in the cockpit at Oatlands where James wagered on bear baitings that pitted mastiffs against chained ursines in roars that shook the rafters. James's favoritism toward the dark-eyed George Villiers, elevated from humble groom of the bedchamber in 1614 to Duke of Buckingham by 1623 through a cascade of monopolies on sweet wines and Irish customs, stirred Charles's affections as well, the trio forming a bond of rakish camaraderie that saw the prince accompany Buckingham on the ill-fated Spanish match of 1623, a clandestine jaunt to Madrid in February disguised as John of Scotland and Tom Smith, a voyage by fishing smack from Sandwich. That devolved into farce amid Philip IV Catholic demands for England's conversion and the Infanta Maria Anna's cloistered veils, Charles's homesick pleas, "I am in a prison here, and not in a court, echoing through the Escorial's marble halls lined with Velázquez precursors until the match collapsed in acrimony on September 17. The duo fleeing back to Dover amid jeers from the Spanish grandees who pelted their carriage with mud, the failure hardening Charles's resolve against popery while deepening the rift with Parliament, whose 1624 session at Westminster demanded war with Spain to avenge the slight. James's reluctant subsidies, pound 300,000 from tonnage and poundage taxes on wine and cloth, funding a desultory Cadiz expedition in October 1625 that ended in drunken debacle. The fleet's 100 ships' crews sacking monasteries for sherry casks from Jerez rather than storming the Silver Fleets, 6,000 sailors perishing to fever in the Guadalquivir's miasma. Charles's accession on March 27, 1625, upon James's death from a tertian ague and kidney stones at Theobald's house in Hertfordshire, his last words a murmur of "Remember thy promise to the bishops," to the weeping Charles, thrust the 24-year-old king onto a throne of gilded thorns, his coronation at Westminster Abbey on February 2, 1626. A spectacle of crimson velvet and ermine amid the choir's anthems of Purcell's precursors, the oil's sacred chrism anointing his brow as trumpets blared. From the triforium galleries and the throng of 2,000 nobles crushed in the nave, yet the realm's Protestant zeal clashed with his Laudian leanings. Archbishop William Laud's Arminian altars, adorned with crucifixes, candles, and embroidered frontals, provoking Puritan scowls in the House of Commons where Sir John Eliot thundered against the popish innovations that smacked of Rome's incense and the Spanish matches ghosts. The 1626 session £75,000 subsidy demanded in exchange for Buckingham's impeachment on 28 articles of corruption, from selling Bordeaux wine monopolies at inflated rates to embezzling £70,000 from the Palatinate aid. Charles's marriage to Henrietta Maria of France on June 13, 1625, at Canterbury Cathedral, a proxy rite in Notre Dame followed by a private mass that scandalized the Kirk elders with its Latin chants and swinging censers, sealed the Anglo-French alliance against Spain and the Habsburgs, the 15-year-old bride arriving in Dover on June 13 amid cannon salutes from Deal Castle, her trousseau of 18 carts laden with silks from Lion looms, jewels from the French crown treasury, and a retinue of 60 French ladies whose farthingales and ruffs clashed with English modesty, the union a whirlwind of Catholic masses in the Queen's Chapel at Somerset House where French Capuchins in brown robes chanted lauds and vespers, drawing 400 converts among the court gallants while Charles's Privy Council fumed at the idolatry that echoed the 1626 French subsidies £40,000. Henrietta's dowry of £100,000 and naval aid from 12 warships funding the disastrous Isle de Rye expedition of 1627, where Buckingham's 6,000 redcoats, ill-clad in threadbare doublets and unpaid for months, foundered on the Huguenot Isle off La Rochelle, 4,000 perishing to dysentery and French cannon from Cardinal Richelieu's galleons that splintered the landing craft like matchwood in the October gales. The survivors retreat a sodden route through the salt marshes where 1,500 drowned in the surf. Parliament's 1626 session, convened at Oxford's Christ Church amid the spire's shadow and the scent of incense from Merton College's chapel, erupted in fury over the villain Buck, the Commons impeaching the Duke on 28 articles of corruption, from selling monopolies on Irish cattle hides to embezzling the Spanish matches £70,000 in jewels pawned for fleet repairs. Yet Charles prorogued the Houses in June after £75,000 in subsidies, dissolving them in August when further demands faltered. His forced loans of £200,000 from 83 knights and merchants, levied without consent via Privy Seal writs delivered by royal messengers on horseback, breeding habeas corpus writs in the King's Bench where Chief Justice Christopher Crewe's refusal to imprison refusers for illegal imprisonment earned his dismissal in October 1627. The Five Knights case a judicial thunderclap that echoed through the Inns of Court from Gray's Inn to the Temple, where Coke's apprentices murmured of Magna Carta's chains. The Petition of Right in 1628, Sir Edward Coke and John Pym's parchment demanding no taxation sans Parliament, no martial law or billeting of troops on civilians, no arbitrary imprisonment, passed both houses amid cheers in the Commons' candlelit chamber on June 7, yet Charles's evasive royal assent, soit droit fate comme est desire, masked his grudging signature on June 26, proroguing the session before it could demand Buckingham's head, the Duke's assassination on August 23 at Portsmouth's Greyfriars Friary by John Felton's dagger, a 4-inch blade thrust upward through the heart as he read a Puritan tract by Alexander Leighton, unleashing a wave of grief that saw 20,000 mourn at his Guildford funeral under a pall of black velvet, Charles vowing in a Privy Council séance, "I shall never forget the blow," while Parliament suppressed joy bubbled in backroom toasts of Canary wine. The King's 1628 birth of his first child, Charles James, a fleeting bomb that died in infancy, deepening the court's melancholy. The personal rule dawned in March 1629 with the dissolution of the Third Parliament after Eliot's seditious Root and Branch bill in the Commons scorched the bishops as a yoke of Antichrist. On February 2, Charles's curt "Go, get you hence. I will have nothing more of this session," echoing in the chamber as Speaker William Finch was held in his chair by royal sergeants with halberds glinting in the lantern light, the 11 years of 11 years tyranny unfolding in a realm of ship money and Star Chamber floggings. Laud 1633 elevation to Canterbury enforcing altar rails and bowing to altars that provoked William Prynne's Puritan screeds in Histriomastics, 1632, his ears cropped in the pillory at Westminster on February 7. 1634, alongside Bastwick and Burton for seditious libel, their pilloried stumps bleeding onto the cobbles as crowds hurled ordure, the Court of High Commission fining John Bastwick £5,000 and branding S.L. for seditious libeller on his cheeks with red-hot irons. Scotland's Kirk ignited the blaze. The 1637 Prayer Book, modelled on the 1549 English Book of Common Prayer with its ornate collects, surplice-clad ministers, and rubric for kneeling at communion, thrust upon the covenanting covenanters at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh on July 23, where marketwoman Jenny Geddes hurled her folding stool at Dean Hannah's head with a cry of, "Devil cause the prelates to stink in hell," the riot swelling from pews to streets where 2,000 surged to Holyrood, demanding the books burn. The National Covenant of February 28, 1638, sworn by 300,000 signatures on vellum rolls in Greyfriars Kirkyard under Alexander Henderson's pulpit thunder, pledging resistance to popish innovations and episcopal tyranny. The bishops' wars erupted in 1639, Charles's 20,000 raw levies, ill-drilled militia from Yorkshire's moors and Northumberland's fells, mustered under the commissions of array that bypassed parliamentary consent, clashed with General Alexander Leslie's 12,000 Covenanters at the Berwick Brig on June 18, the Treaty of Berwick averting blood with a Parliament's promise and the pacification of Berwick. Yet the 1640 Short Parliament, convened at Whitehall's banqueting house amid Rubens's ceiling frescoes of James's apotheosis, demanded Strafford's head and ship money's end before subsidies, lasting 3 weeks from April 13 before dissolution on May 5 amid cries of "No bishops, no popery." The Long Parliament assembled on November 3, 1640, John Pym's iron hand from Northamptonshire impeaching Thomas Wentworth, Earl of Strafford, on 12 articles of tyranny, from the Irish plantations forced plantations of 2.5 million acres to the 1626 forced loans chains that beggared 83 refusers, his trial in Westminster Hall from March 22 to May 10, 1641, a spectacle of 300 peers and 500 commoners crammed under the hammer beams were the Lord Deputy's defence, a blaze of eloquence citing the King's prerogative, faltered against Pym's 12-hour orations, the Commons Militia Bill looming as Strafford whispered to Charles, "You have done all for me that a king can do," his execution on May 12 at Tower Hill under a black-draped scaffold, 200,000 spectators weeping as the axe fell, his last words, "Put not your trust in princes," a requiem for royal favour. The Irish Rebellion of October 1641, Ulster's planters' throats slit in the Portadown Bridge massacre where 4,000 Protestants drowned or were hacked in the band's icy ford, Sir Philem O'Neill's insurgents seizing Dublin Castle, fueled Parliament's grand remonstrance of November 22, 1641. A 200-page Jeremiad passed by 11 votes amid sword-drawn scuffles in the Commons where Denzil Hollis's blade glinted, indicting the King's popish councillors from Laud's altars to Henrietta's French masses. Charles's riposte the 1642 19 propositions demanding control of militia, household, and foreign policy, rejected in a Privy Council séance at York where the King mustered 2,000 cavaliers under the commissions of array. The First Civil War's tocsin told on August 22, 1642, at Nottingham Castle where Charles unfurled his royal standard, crimson silk embroidered with the motto, "Give Caesar his due," in gold thread, amid the clang of anvils forging pikes, 12,000 cavaliers in buff coats and steel lobster tails clashing with Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex's 15,000 Roundheads at Edgehill on October 23, Rupert's 3,000 cuirassiers, thundering like iron hooves in the cornfields, routing Parliament's dragoons in a pistol shot thunder that scattered blue regiments, the king's white ostrich plume nodding amid the melee as he rallied the faltering centre with cries of, "For God and the King," the day's 1,500 dead on both sides ending in twilight stalemate, Charles decamping to Oxford Spires where Christ Church Meadow became a bivouac for 10,000 royalists who dubbed the town His Majesty's most loyal city and university, its colleges requisitioned for powder mills and surgeons' tents where limbs fell to saws. Amid the scent of ether and gangrene, the war's seesaw ground through the 1643 siege of Reading, Parliament's cannon breaching the walls after a month of famine where royalists ate their horses' hides, and Leeds's woolen mills stormed on January 23, 1644, by Fairfax's Northern Horse, yet royalist panache prevailed at Sheraton Down on March 29, where Sir Jacob Astley's 4,000 pikes held the hedge lines against Waller's 7,000 in a melee of rustling bayonets. Scotland's alliance tipped the scales. The Solemn League and Covenant of September 1643 bound the Covenanters to Parliament's aid, 21,000 Scots under Leven marching south to shatter the king's northern flank at Marston Moor on July 2, 1644, Rupert's 18,000, bolstered by Goring's 6,000 Irish papists, routed in the heather by Cromwell's 6,000 Ironsides whose psalm-sung charges, "The Lord of Hosts is with us," flanked the royal horse, Langdale's Welsh foot crumpling under Ireton's dragoons in a hail of carbine balls, 4,000 cavaliers slain or drowned in the Swales Ford, the king's flight to York a shadow amid the pyres of his artillery train. Naseby on June 14, 1645, sealed the royal doom, Cromwell's 6,000 horse flanking the king's 4,000 in a wheat-field thunder where Rupert's charge splintered on the new model's redcoats, muskets cracking like whips in the harvest haze as the king's colours fell to Sergeant Joyce's pike, 1,000 cavaliers dead in Henrietta's baggage train, silks from Lyon, jewels from the Tower, love letters sended with adder, looted for Parliament's coffers, revealing missives that branded Charles uxorious tyrant in Pym's broadsheets. Surrender at Newark on May 5, 1646, to Leven Scots who demanded his person for £400,000 arrears and treaty debts, delivered him to Holmby House's velvet captivity in Northamptonshire, its gardens a gilded cage where he played Pall Mall with his gentlemen, yet his escape on November 11 to the Isle of Wight's Carisbrooke Castle, a Norman motte ringed by bulwarks where Elizabeth had once paced, proved a fool's gambit, Colonel Robert Hammond's guards foiling his bedsheet rope over the battlements with barred windows and locked posterns, the engagement's royalist rising of 1648 crushed at Preston on August 17 by Lambert's 9,000, where 9,000 Hamiltonians, Scottish royalists lured by Charles's promises, drowned in the Ribbles Ford or fell to Cromwell's pikes, 1,500 prisoners marched to London in chains. Pride's Purge on December 6, 1648, swept 143 Presbyterians from the Commons with musketeers at the door, leaving the Rumps 200 radicals, coined by Clement Walker for their "rotten purge," to indict the king on January 1, 1649, for high treason, in Westminster Hall's rafters, where 135 commissioners under John Bradshaw's black hat, a Puritan emblem of plainness, thundered 33 articles of blood guilt from the Irish massacres of 1641 where 4,000 Protestants perished at Drogheda to the personal rules. Chains that beggared merchants, Charles's defense a blaze of divine right, the king cannot be tried by any superior jurisdiction on earth, for he is answerable only to God, his silence on the scaffold's eve a stoic prayer in St. James's Chapel to Bishop William Juxon, who held the white staff of office. The axe fell on January 30, 1649, at Whitehall's banqueting house, Rubens's ceiling frescoes of James I apotheosis gazing down in ironic splendor as Charles, in double-breasted black with a blue riband of the garter, laid his neck on the block after a last sermon to Juxon, the headsman stroke, a clean severance with a single blow from a razor-edged axe, rolling into sawdust with a thud. The king's last words, "Remember," a plea for his son's succession amid the crowd's hushed frost, 2,000. Spectators from apprentices to aldermen witnessing the Rumps' proclamation of the Commonwealth on February 7, Charles's head sewn back by royal embalmers for the effigy's Windsor burial on February 9, his martyrdom's ink birthing icon Basilique's pious forgery of 1649, 35 editions in months, outselling the King James Bible with engravings of the King in prayer. That stirred royalist tears from Oxford's colleges to the Scottish kirks. The interregnum's iron yoke under Oliver Cromwell's protectorate, declared on December 16, 1653, after the nominated Assembly's dissolution by muskets in the Painted Chamber, the barebones Parliament's 140 saints, yielding to the instrument of government's Republican husk, ground the realm under Major General's decimation of the shires into 12 districts patrolled by Puritan enforcers who shuttered alehouses and whipped maypoles. Cromwell's Irish campaigns of 1649–50 at Drogheda and Wexford, claiming 5,000 Catholic garrison souls in massacres that echoed to the Caribbean's Sugar Islands. The Protector's death on September 3, 1658, at Whitehall amid the scent of plague-ridden London, his last words, "My desire is to make what haste I can to be gone," left his son Richard's feeble grasp crumbling under Monk's march from Coldstream in January 1660, the general's 7,000 redcoats crossing the Tweed unopposed to seize London on February 3 amid snow-swept streets, the Convention Parliament's recall on April 25 at Westminster, its members in beaver hats and sword belts, voting restoration. On May 8 by acclamation, Charles II landing at Dover on May 26 amid 20,000's cheers and Hyde Park's oak garlands woven with roses, the merry monarch's progress to Whitehall, a cavalcade of 1,000 coaches where Oxford's bells pealed and Edinburgh's kirks tolled in echo. The executed king's legacy fractured the realm's soul like a stained-glass shatter, to royalists. A martyr saint whose blood sanctified the divine right in John Gauden's forged icon Basilique, its frontispiece of Charles in prayer amid thorns stirring 200,000 tears from Cornish tin mines to the Scottish Highlands, to Republicans, a tyrant whose scaffold birthed leveller dreams of the 1647 agreement of the people with its universal manhood suffrage, though Cromwell's Drogheda slaughters, 3,500 slain in the breach on September 11, 1649, eclipsed the king's Irish ghosts in Clarendon codes. Vengeful ink. Art's quill immortalized him, Anthony van Dyck's 1636 equestrian at the Louvre, Charles in plumed helm atop a dappled grey at Greenwich Park, his gaze imperious over the Thames's bend, captures the king's grace before the gale, the canvas's 12-foot span a royalist relic smuggled from Whitehall in 1649. While Louis-François Roubilliac's 1725 Windsor effigy in white marble reclines eternal with folded hands clutching a scepter, a lock of his hair, auctioned in 2011 for £7,014 at Bonham's, whispering of the boy who limped to his throne amid St. James's nurseries. Literature laments his shade. John Milton's 1649 Iconoclasts thunders Republican fire with 30 editions countering the king's piety. A wise man will not lose his time in reading trash, yet Andrew Marvell's Horatian Ode of 1650 crowns him saintly foil to Cromwell's blade. He nothing common did or mean slash upon that memorable scene. While Hilary Mantle's 2009 Wolf Hall nods to his scaffold's echo in Thomas Cromwell's 1540 block at Tower Hill, the executioner's acts a Tudor refrain. Cinema conjures his ghost. Alec Guinness's 1970 Cromwell throbs with his velvet-clad dignity amid the rump's roar in Westminster Hall, the trial's 33 witnesses a cacophony of Puritan barbs, while the Devil's Whores 2008 miniseries casts him in Andrea Riseborough's gaze as a tragic consort to Angelica's fire. In England's calendar, his January 30th fast day, mandated by the 1661 Act of Oblivion, lingered till 1859 as a day of mourning with muffled bells and black cockades, a Puritan shadow on the monarchy's rose that George III's 1788 illness revived in Whig pamphlets, his son's 1660 restoration a phoenix from Naseby's wheat field where the king's standard, crimson taffeta with gold lions, still lies buried under Northampton's ploughed earth, unearthed in 1999's dig yielding silk threads and bone buttons. Charles's blood pulses in the Windsors, through James II Catholic line to Queen Victoria's veins via Sophia of Hanover, while Scottish Jacobites toasted his shade at Killiecrankie's Torrent in 1689 and Culloden's Moor in 1746 with "The King over the water," his name a thistle in the Tudor rose, a caution etched in scaffold sawdust, divine right's dream drowned in Parliament's ink. The Whitehall banqueting house's ceiling, Rubens' 1636 piece and war gazing down on the block, a perpetual witness to the king's last stride. The mistakes that led to Charles I's downfall were a tragic cascade of absolutist arrogance, religious intransigence, and a profound misjudgment of Parliament's iron will that transformed a king's scepter into a headsman's axe, unraveling the Stuart compact in a civil war's crimson flood. Foremost loomed his doctrine of divine right, espoused in the 1628 Declaration of Sports that sanctioned maypoles, bear baitings, and archery on Sundays amid Puritan scowls from the Long Parliament's benches, and the 1633 Laudian canons enforcing altar rails as popish baubles, and bowing to the east in worship that smacked of transubstantiation, which alienated the commons gentry whose purses funded the realm through tonnage and poundage. His refusal to summon Parliament for 11 years from March 1629 breeding the 1640 Short Parliament's fury over ship money's £200,000 annual levy that beggared Essex merchants without consent, the Five Knights case of 1627 a judicial spark in the King's Bench where Chief Justice Crewe's habeas corpus writs kindled Pym's remonstrance of 1641. Compounding this, his Scottish blunders, the 1637 prayer book's imposition on the Covenanters at St. Giles Cathedral, Jenny Geddes' hurled stool shattering the Dean's lectern on July 23 amid cries of "a French bauble," igniting the 1638 National Covenant sworn by 300,000 in Greyfriars Kirkyard under Alexander Henderson's thunder, erupted the Bishops' Wars of 1639–40, draining £1 million from Crown coffers without parliamentary purse, the Berwick-Brigg standoff's 20,000 raw levies, Yorkshire militia in threadbare buff coats, clashing with Leslie's 12,000 Covenanting pikes, forcing the Long Parliament's recall where Strafford's Irish army, 28,000 pikes and 10,000 horse for a popish purge of the Pale, became the Earl's scaffold noose on Tower Hill on May 12, 1641, his executions 200,000 spectators a sea of black cloaks under London's leaden sky. Militarily, his reliance on Prince Rupert's cavalry panache, thundering at Edgehill's October 23, 1642, cornfields where 3,000 cuirassiers routed Essex's dragoons in a pistol-shot thunder that scattered blue regiments, yet faltering at Marston Moor's July 2, 1644, heather where Cromwell's 6,000 Ironsides, psalm-sung charges of "The Lord of Hosts is with us," flanked the Royal Horse, Langdale's 4,000 Welsh foot crumpling under Ireton's dragoons in a hail of carbine balls that felled 4,000, ignored the New Model Army's disciplined 22,000 under Fairfax, Naseby's June 14, 1645, Wheatfield rout scattering 4,000 Cavaliers while Henrietta's baggage train yielded 200 love letters sended with adder that Pym's broadsheets branded him uxorious tyrant, his 1646 Newark surrender to Laven Scots a velvet chain that dragged him to Carisbrook's barred windows. On November 11, where Colonel Hammond's guards foiled his bedsheet escape over the battlements. Personally, his vacillations, the 1642-19 propositions rejection breeding the commissions of array that mustered 12,000 royalists in Nottingham's Castle Yard, his 1647 engagement with the New Model Army at Newport a fleeting olive branch promising Presbyterianism for 3 years shattered by Pride's purge on December 6, 1648, when Colonel Thomas Pride's 400 musketeers barred 143 Presbyterians from the Commons' door, shuddered the Rump's 200 radicals who indicted him for treason in Westminster Hall's rafters on January 20, 1649, his trial's silence under Bradshaw's Black Hat a martyr's ploy that sealed the block on January 30, his last words to Juxon, remember, a plea for James's succession amid the 2,000 frostbitten spectators. At core, Charles mistook God's anointment for Parliament's consent, piety's altar for political forge, laud's incense for unifying balm, turning Whitehall's banqueting house, Rubens' 1636 piece and war gazing down, into his scaffold stage, his divine right a requiem for the realm he ruled unbroken, the axe's thud a thunderclap that birthed the Commonwealth's bare republic.